Hey, Tom Bartels from GrowFoodWell.com, and thanks for joining me today for Weeds, Pests, and Living Soil. This is a free mini workshop on home food gardening, and this is the first of 3 videos. Today we're going to be talking about reducing weeds in all of your vegetable beds by design, while increasing the amount of food in those same beds. Now, I'm growing in about 17 different beds at home, and I only weed once per year. And I'll show you how that works in just a second. But first I wanted to recognize that if you're watching this video, you're probably interested in growing food, good, organic, nutritious food at home. Congratulations on that goal. It can be very rewarding when things go well. And it's also possible that things get frustrating if things don't go as you planned, or if you're growing so fast and adding beds that you get ahead of yourself and it gets overwhelming. And since we have so many different growing conditions and bed sizes, I think it's important for you to get a clear idea of what a successful garden would be for you this coming spring, and hold that vision in mind as we go through these steps. It's really fun to watch the transformation in my students when they gain some certainty on how to grow whatever kind of food they want at home in any conditions. Like growing carrots successfully and trying to get these to the point where every year you get carrots like this and like this. In this bed that I'm working right now, there are 500 carrots like these. Now, it didn't take but a few hours to plant this bed in the spring, but because of the methods I used, it created several hundred pounds of carrots, and that's a lot of fun. It's easy to replicate the success every year. Maybe on the 3rd video, I'll show you some of the food that we store all winter long that comes from these same beds. So no matter where you are or what size your garden beds are, the methods I'll be showing you in these videos will help you get to the next level in food growing at home, just by watching the videos. They're conceptual, so you can just learn the steps and then use them next year to make your optimal food garden. It's all about aligning with natural systems so that they can help your plants grow strong, whether you're home or not. In my classes, I use my own situation as an example of what can be done. My gardens are a bit larger than some and smaller than other people in my workshops who have larger growing areas, but the methods help everyone grow better food. I grow about 1,000 pounds of organic produce each year at home in Colorado at 6,500 feet of elevation. It's about 30% of my annual food needs, and I have a short growing season of about 125 to 130 days. My beds cover about 1,300 square feet. I've been growing organic food here since 2001 and showing others how to do the same. And I don't spend the summer chained to my garden. I've got things to do, just like everyone else. I'm not a farmer, I just grow food at home. And so can you, once you understand the methods. I had someone ask me last week if I always had this kind of garden success, and I had to laugh. I didn't have to think, because of course not. When I started gardening years and years ago, I sucked at gardening. In fact, here's a shot of me from decades ago when I first started gardening. I totally sucked at it. And then she started laughing because it made things seem more doable for her, seeing that I struggled too in the beginning. And that's an important psychological shift. All these photos that you've been seeing are all things that are doable. You just have to understand the methods. So I took that to heart and started thinking about long ago, 17 or 18 years ago when I started this out, how foreign these concepts and methods seemed to me. And then I thought, wow, how much easier it's been in the most recent decade, not because I'm smarter or stronger or anything, I just understand the methods now. So it's easy every year. After surveying the members in the garden workshops, I found they had interest in 3 main categories: weeds, disease and pests, and weak soil. So let's jump over to the screen and we'll get right into reducing weeds. One of the first rules for reducing weeds in the garden goes against what seems to be an old habit, and that's planting in rows. Many people who use this method end up with weak plant growth and lots of weed competition. If you're still planting in rows with paths in between each row, I would politely persuade you to instead plant in blocks. You'll not only decrease weeds, but increase your yields in each bed. Let's take a look at how that works. First, look at what happens when plants are sown in rows. The first thing it does is reduce the available space where food's grown, so you aren't getting the full benefit of the space available. Secondly, any exposed soil, like where all the pathways are, allows for weed seeds to germinate, which creates more labor for you. The exposed soil also creates higher evaporative loss and larger temperature swings, so the garden will require more water during the season. Now let's look at planting in blocks. I tend to plant in beds that are 4 to 5 feet wide, so you can reach halfway across from either side and plant at what are called intensive spacings. Consequently, each veggie variety has a different distance between its neighbor on all sides. When these plants get to adolescence, their canopies touch, and then magic happens. They'll shade out the rest of the beds, and they have plenty of nutrients coming from deep in the soil that have been prepped with compost and worm castings. What this does is help shade out the weeds that try to germinate under that canopy. Your plants will be given a chance to outcompete the weeds. More food with less work. It also creates a microclimate under the canopy that helps reduce temperature swings and keeps the soil around your plants cooler, which reduces evaporative loss, reduces stress on your plants, and helps maintain optimal growing conditions. All those benefits come from just arranging the plants in blocks. That one method can help improve your beds on multiple fronts. It's a very powerful concept once you understand it and use it everywhere. If you have open, unplanted soil anywhere in your garden, you're inviting weeds to grow. Instead, you want a vegetable plant to be using that real estate. Now, I should mention, there are other steps that lead to the conditions in my garden beds in the photos, and I go over all those variables in later videos and in the main workshops. Weed growth actually helps your garden in many ways by breaking up hard soils and bringing minerals up to the surface and showing weaker points in the garden. When we get to soil improvement techniques in the third video, I'll show you how improving soil conditions can actually reduce weeds, since fewer imbalances exist in healthier soils. Weeds are usually a symptom of weaker soil. Planting with your frost dates in mind is key as well. So it's important to give your plants the right start in the spring so they can compete with all the other native plants in your area that are all waiting to sprout. If you plant too early, you can hit late frosts, or plant too late and your veggies are fighting against weeds that have more time to grow. Planting your seedlings too late also reduces the chance that that plant's going to mature before fall frosts. Never plant in a fresh bed that already has weeds sprouting in it. Instead, go ahead and weed the beds as you're amending and prepping that soil. If you can do this with as little disruption as possible by just hand pulling, that will reduce the number of new weed seeds that are pulled up to the surface for germination. When planting out seedlings, it's much easier to have them get a hold before weed growth catches up. But when planting by seed, it gets a bit trickier. When you do weed a garden bed, if you can, pull the weeds up by hand shortly after it's rained, so the weeds come up easily. If you need to use a hoe or some other tool, try not to turn too much soil to reduce the new weed seeds being moved to the surface. The best time to weed is right before the adolescent plants touch leaves, so that by the time they do, very few weeds will have a chance to compete under the shade of that canopy. That should be the only time you do your main weeding on that bed for the whole season, unless you're doing multiple plantings in the same bed. When you do weed, put the weeds in the compost. They're great at helping concentrate nutrients that can become plant food for the next season's garden. It's the ultimate payback. Weeds are not your enemies. I just look at them as free nitrogen for the compost pile. Drip irrigation systems only deliver water to your veggies, which gives them a head start on the weeds, and reduces all-around weed growth in the garden beds compared to overhead watering. If you're using hoses with spray wands all the time for the entire season, you're actually helping the weeds compete with your own plants. Using drip irrigation also gives you the option to automate the watering on a timer, which I would suggest. Erratic watering creates weaker plants, which then have a harder time competing with weeds. Mulching around your plants once they've come up is an excellent way to keep weeds at a minimum throughout their growing season. You can use compost for this, or leaves, or straw. And while on that subject, watch out for herbicide carryover. Broadleaf herbicides are used everywhere now, so I use leaves and compost for most of my mulch. Be careful where you source materials for mulch and compost. Herbicide carryover is a widespread problem, unfortunately. There are many ways to avoid it, however. You can rarely prevent all the weeds, so whatever weeds did sneak into the beds, after you harvest your veggies, remember to go back and pull those adult weeds that will typically have pretty large seed heads on them. This is very important so they don't set up a new seed bank for the following year. Pull the entire plant up by the roots the day after a rain. This usually only happens on the perimeters and usually doesn't take that long. By using all or just some of the methods you've seen in this video, you should see a major reduction of weeds in the garden. By just dovetailing your efforts with the way natural systems work, you can enjoy incredible amounts of organic food with less work. One of the biggest hurdles people have in that regard is with insect pests and disease in the garden. So in the next video, I'll be showing you how to sidestep most of those problems with insects and pests using simple organic methods. That's it for now. Thanks for joining me.